Have you ever grown a plant that quietly cursed your home's feng shui? Like it looks peaceful, maybe even elegant, but somehow the energy around your house just feels heavier. Money gets delayed. Weird things start breaking, and nights get longer than they should. Susan from down the block? She had a gorgeous plant blooming by her porch until her dog refused to walk past it. Her lights started flickering, and one night she swore she saw someone standing in her yard, but no one was there. This isn't ghost story hour. It's cursed feng shui mistakes real plants, real energy disruptions, and real consequences for your flow of money, peace, and luck. Because some plants don't just look strange. They store stuck energy. They hold on to trauma, attract wandering spirits, and block the energy lines you've worked so hard to clear. And when they're near your doors or windows, they mess with your chi, your money flow, even your sleep. So today, we're going to walk through 9 plants you should never grow, especially if you care about lucky energy, quiet protection, and peaceful feng shui around your home. If this kind of wisdom speaks to you, if you've ever felt like you're doing everything to stay afloat, and it still isn't flowing, thank you for being here. Feel free to hit like, subscribe, or even drop a comment below. It helps YouTube know you're part of this quiet shift. And now, let's walk through your yard together. You might spot something you didn't realize was working against you. Sometimes what's blocking your money isn't in your wallet. It's in the soil right outside your front door. Susan had always been drawn to plants that looked dramatic. Twisting stems, long shadows, dark green leaves. She found one at a local nursery labeled crow's claw, a rare variety of Euphorbia. It was thorny, almost sculptural. She placed it right by her front steps, thinking it would give her porch some edge. It did more than that. That was the month her house started feeling cold, even with the heater on. Friends stopped coming by as often. She started waking up at 3:17 every night. Her dog growled at the window for no reason. She said it felt like the energy was pulling inward. Like something in her home didn't want lighter people in anymore. And somehow, the money in her checking account never seemed to stay put. The problem wasn't just the look of the plant. It was the energy it pulled into the home. Feng Shui teaches that certain plants, especially spiky, thorny, or highly defensive one-scan, interrupt the energy map of your house. They guard, they push, they block. When placed at your front entrance, they act like energetic bodyguards. But the kind that doesn't let anyone in. Not good people. Not lucky energy. Not money flow. That crow's claw sat like a gatekeeper clamping down on chi. It stopped the natural flow of support, conversation, even spontaneous joy. Susan's house didn't just feel quiet. It felt cut off. What Susan didn't realize was that she had started matching the energy of the plant. It looked defensive, and she became defensive. She found herself turning down dinner invites, avoiding calls, even skipping out on her weekly walks with her neighbor Jill. Not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't explain this weird weight that showed up out of nowhere. It's the kind of mood where you don't cry. You just close the door a little sooner. Lower your voice. Forget what smiling felt like on a Tuesday. That plant was like a tiny haunted house by the door. Beautiful, mysterious, and silently saying, "Keep out." And that message didn't just go to strangers. It went to opportunity. It went to cash flow. It went to her own sense of connection. Sometimes Feng Shui mistakes don't scream. They just sit there, quietly training your space to repel the very things you've been working so hard to welcome. Susan didn't Google it at first. It was her cousin Maria who mentioned how plants give off more than oxygen. She said, "Girl, some plants hold moods, especially ones with thorns. They protect you, but they also trap." Turns out, Euphorbia releases a kind of latex that can be toxic and irritate the skin. But in Feng Shui, the bigger deal is the symbolic energy. Plants like these don't just protect, they repel. And when placed near the front of the home, they block the entry point of qi. The main place where wealth, support, and love are meant to enter. Susan finally pulled it up. Not with gloves. With intention. She placed a bowl of salt water by her door for 3 nights. Burned sagino just for the space, but for herself. She repotted a soft bamboo plant in its place and said out loud, "I'm ready to welcome support again." She opened all the windows that Sunday. Let errant noise come back in. She turned music on, let her dog nap in the sun. And that night, she slept straight through till morning. Now, every time she passes the nursery, she whispers, "No more drama plants, thank you." Because she realized something simple. If your front porch looks like it's protecting a dragon egg, your energy might be too guarded to let money in. Let nature support you, not scare away your flow. In Feng Shui, some plants don't just take up space. They take up your luck. A few weeks after removing the thorny crow's claw, Susan felt lighter. But she still couldn't figure out why money kept slipping through her fingers. Small bills, missed tips, random overdraft fees. Like every time she gained something, it vanished within days. One Saturday, her friend Carla dropped by with a smoothie and asked, "Why do you have devil's ivy hanging in your hallway?" Susan blinked. "I don't. That's just pothos. It's good for air, right?" Turns out that exact species, Epipremnum aureus, known in some Feng Shui circles as energy twisters when left unchecked. Especially when they're dying, trailing on the floor, or touching multiple corners of the home. Which hers were. She had 5 hanging baskets, all with long, trailing vines, most yellowing or half-dried. One stretched from her kitchen cabinet to the edge of her hallway. She'd never seen it as a problem. But now, she realized this thing was touching everything. In Feng Shui, pothos vines are a double-edged sword. When healthy and contained, they can recycle energy. But when neglected or overgrown, they twist qi. They act like cables wrapping your energy in knots, pulling cash one direction and your attention another. Susan's vines connected too many zones: her kitchen, hallway, laundry door, and even the top of her fridge. That tangled movement disrupted the house's natural energy map. It blurred boundaries. Her home didn't feel open or flowy. It felt confusing, cluttered, mentally sticky. There's a kind of tension you don't notice at first. But once it lifts, you feel like your thoughts come back in straight lines again. The vines matched her mood. Stretching too thin. Always reaching. Never quite rooted. She was constantly multitasking. Thinking about bills while folding towels, checking emails in bed, grabbing dinner at 9 p.m. Her space had no defined flow, and neither did her habits. She'd often say, "I just feel like there's too much on my plate." But it wasn't the plate. It was the layout. If any of this feels like your house too, if your energy keeps looping back on itself, If you've been chasing lucky flow but feeling tangled instead, this is your moment. Go ahead and like, subscribe, or share this with a friend who's been asking, why does it feel like things just keep circling? Let's help more homes break that pattern. Those vines weren't just green. They were silent wires, connecting energy leaks across the house. It's like leaving a garden hose running, except the water is your focus, your cash, and your clarity. Susan once joked that her home felt like one big to-do list. But Feng Shui showed her the real issue. The energy of her space was unfinished, unpruned, and ungrounded. And vines like that? They don't invite abundance. They strangle it. Pothos is known for air purification, but it also thrives in neglect, which is the problem. In Feng Shui, plants that survive anywhere often represent survival mode, energy that endures without truly thriving. When vines start touching too many zones, they create cross signals. It's like mixing your work life with your rest zone, no boundaries, no breath. For the nervous system, that adds up fast. Maria, the same cousin who mentioned thorny plants, told her, cut them back. Let your space breathe like your budget needs to. Susan didn't toss them all. She trimmed each vine, repotted only 2, and placed them near her windows with soft stones at the base. She gave the rest away. Then she took a walk, not for cardio, but for clarity. The next time Carla visited, she said, "Girl, your hallway doesn't feel like a jungle anymore." Susan smiled. "Yeah, it feels like my mind took off its shoes." That week, a surprise refund showed up in her account. Not much, but enough to feel like a shift had begun. Now Susan jokes, if your plant is touching more rooms than your vacuum, it might be time for scissors. Not everything that grows should grow wild, especially your energy. A home can feel rich in decor and still be poor in energy. After trimming the vines, Susan's space felt clearer. She moved easier. She even started cooking again. But there was still this weird heaviness in her living room, especially around the windows. It was the only spot that stayed cold even on sunny days. And strangely, she never wanted to sit there. One afternoon, while dusting, she paused at her orchid. It had been there for months. White petals, bare stems, sitting in a glossy black pot with fake moss. It looked expensive, but something about it felt frozen. She realized she hadn't touched it in weeks. No watering, no trimming, no love. And it still hadn't changed. No new buds, no decay. Just stillness, like time stopped. In Feng Shui, orchids can be powerful symbols of luxury and balance. But when they're placed wrong or go untended, they trap stagnant energy. Especially fake or half-dead orchids. They don't invite energy to move. They hold it, freeze it. And when placed near windows, they can create a blocked bloom effect, where light is present but nothing grows. That orchid sat right where wealth energy was meant to gather. Right where light came in, where warmth should have activated qi. Instead, it acted like a lock on the door. Polished, pretty, but cold. It didn't give energy. It kept it from flowing. Susan realized she had grown used to beautiful things that didn't love her back. That orchid was a mirror. It looked alive, but had stopped growing. Just like the parts of her that stopped expecting good surprises. Like wealth that never arrived. Like effort that didn't return results. She said, "It feels like I've been in a waiting room for too long. Dressed up, polite, but just waiting." That orchid wasn't a flower. It was a pause button, pressed hard. It reminded her of when someone gives you a gift out of obligation. Nice to look at, but hollow in meaning. That's what her wealth corner had become. Decorated, but not alive. A Feng Shui mistake isn't always ugly. Sometimes it's silent, stylish, and suffocating your lucky flow. Susan called her older neighbor Donna, who used to work in interior staging. She said, "Sweetie, orchids are like relationships. If they're not growing, they're just sitting in the way." Donna told her that plants near windows are supposed to work with the light. When they don't, they block it. And in Feng Shui, the light is how wealth gets carried into your space. If the light's blocked even by something pretty, the energy stops before it ever gets in. Susan moved the orchid to the back patio. Not as punishment, just to let that corner breathe. She placed a small jade plant by the window instead, one with soft, round leaves and a little golden coin charm tied to the pot. She wiped the glass, lit a tea candle, and said, "Let this space live again." That night, she read by the window for the first time in months. And it didn't feel cold anymore. Now, when she passes orchids at the store, she laughs. "I'm only buying it if it comes with rent money." Let your beauty bloom where energy moves, not where it hides. In Feng Shui, some plants don't block your path. They block your future. Susan's living room had finally started feeling more alive. The windows were clear. The corners breathed. And she even caught herself humming while sweeping. But when her younger brother Dave came to visit, he didn't say anything about her living room. He went straight to the backyard and pointed. "Why do you have that tree so close to the house? It's basically hugging your wall." She followed him out. In the back corner, an old weeping fig tree leaned into the siding of her house. The leaves were glossy, the roots were thick. But the whole thing collapsed inward. Even the branches curved toward the ground like it was tired of standing. Susan remembered planting it 7 years agorite after her divorce. Back then, it felt like a symbol of starting fresh. But now, it felt like it hadn't let her move on. In Feng Shui, weeping figs, Ficus benjamina, are tricky. They're heavy-rooted, moody with change, and they hold emotional memory. When placed too close to the home, especially near windows or foundation walls, they trap emotional residue. They send chi downward instead of letting it rise. And when they press against the house, they squeeze the flow of energy from the outside in. Susan's tree didn't just lean physically. It leaned energetically, pulling her energy back into the past, blocking her wealth line and creating a slow zone at the rear of her home. A space that should have felt open and expanding now felt like a dead-end road. The tree wasn't just a plant. It was a memory anchor. Every time she saw it, she thought of what didn't work, what didn't last, what she lost. She hadn't dated in years. Not because she didn't want love, but because the space around her didn't feel like it had room for new people, new conversations, new cash flow. The back of her house reflected her deepest emotional habit. Fold in, hold tight, protect what's left. That tree was like an old voicemail that never got deleted. It didn't scream. It just stayed there low, quiet, heavy, blocking the sun, leaning on the house, making the yard feel like it didn't belong to the present anymore. Feng Shui mistakes don't always start as mistakes. Sometimes they grow into one slowly. Like this fig, bending your energy toward what was, instead of making room for what could be. Dave told her the tree needed to be moved. Not just because of Feng Shui, because the roots were messing with the foundation. She looked it up later. Weeping figs are known for invasive roots that grow wide and shallow. They crack pipes, disrupt drains. In Feng Shui terms, they damage the foundation of energy too literally and emotionally. A healthy backyard should feel open and awake. But hers felt like a sigh that never ended. And the more she looked at it, the more she realized, maybe this thing grew right into my grief. Susan didn't have the heart to chop it down, but she found a local garden center that specialized in relocation. She had the tree carefully removed and replaced it with a citrus bush, something that symbolized sweetness, growth, and fresh energy. She added a wind chime to the fence behind it and placed a clay pot of sunflowers by the back door. That evening, she invited Dave to stay for dinner. They ate outside, laughed louder than usual, and for the first time in a long while, the backyard didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a future. Now, whenever someone talks about planting roots, Susan chuckles. Just make sure they don't mess up your pipes or your peace. Let what grows behind you support your rise, not block your wealth. When you plant fear in pretty soil, it grows quiet wealth blocks. It started with a gift. A neighbor down the street, a sweet older woman named Elaine, dropped by with a potted plant wrapped in gold foil. She said, "People used to swear by this for protection. Keeps away bad luck." The plant had thick, waxy leaves, bright red flowers that pointed straight out. Elaine called it a devil's backbone. Susan didn't think twice. She placed it near her front door, right next to the mat that read, "Come as you are." It was her first time receiving a gift plant in years. She wanted to honor it. And for the first few days, everything felt fine. Then came the headaches. Not constant, just sharp and random. Then the forgotten bills. Then the day her kitchen faucet broke for no reason. Nothing huge, but everything started feeling clogged. Her friend Carla walked in one evening and said, "Why does your entryway feel like a waiting room at a courthouse?" In Feng Shui, plants gifted with heavy names or violent symbols carry more than beauty. They carry stories. The devil's backbone Euphorbia, Tithymaloidesis, beautiful in its way. But its energy is stubborn. Its shape suggests imbalance, twisting, spiking, curling in weird directions. And when placed near a front door, it doesn't block intruders. It blocks support. Front doors are the mouth of qi, where money, clarity, relationships, and good energy all enter. When that space holds a plant with conflict built into its name, you invite resistance, not richness. A space meant for welcome begins to feel like warning. Susan didn't just accept a plant. She accepted a belief that she needed protection first before she could feel lucky, loved, or safe. That mindset had followed her quietly for years. Ever since her divorce, ever since she stopped feeling like her space was hers. By putting the plant by the door, she told her home, "Expect trouble." And the home listened. That plant was like leaving a "Beware of dog" sign on an empty house. It told the world, "I'm afraid. I'm expecting something to go wrong." And energy, especially in Feng Shui, responds to that tone. It's like having a bodyguard in a party dress. Stylish, silent, but always watching the exits. What was meant to protect ended up preparing for the worst. And that preparation became a subtle block to abundance. Susan asked Elaine one afternoon why she gave her that exact plant. Elaine said, "I don't know, hon. My sister gave it to me when I had a run of bad luck. It always felt like it was watching the door. That stuck. She searched online and found dozens of old forums and blogs where people shared similar stories. Headaches, miscommunication, slowed money flow. Turns out, the sap of the plant is mildly toxic too. But for Susan, the bigger toxin wasn't chemical. It was emotional posture. A plant that says guard everything doesn't let anything in, not even the good. One Sunday morning, Susan took the plant to the far back of her garden. She said thank you and let it go. In its place, she placed a bowl of citrine stones by the front, step known in Feng Shui for wealth and light. She added 2 soft plants in clay pots, lavender and rosemary. Things that grow upward with ease. Things that smell like welcome. She opened the front door for 2 hours. Let breeze move through her space. No music, no talking, just flow. That evening, she laughed so hard at dinner with Carla, she dropped her fork. Now when people ask her what she grows by the door, she grins. Nothing with horns, thank you very much. Your home listens louder than you think? So plant what speaks fortune, not fear. Not all darkness is haunted. Some of it just grows in the wrong pot. Susan was starting to feel like her house was finally exhaling. She'd cleared the door, moved out the fear, and was beginning to enjoy her mornings again. She even started bringing fresh flowers into her kitchen. But there was still one spot that didn't sit right her hallway table. That narrow surface under the family photo wall had been home to one plant for years. Mother-in-law's tongue or snake plant. Stiff, upright, and pointed. It had been a housewarming gift from her ex-mother-in-law, back when things were still hopeful. The plant had survived everything moves, heat, drought, even her forgetting it existed for a while. But it had never grown. Just stood there. Still. Sharp. One day, Susan's co-worker Janelle came over to borrow a ladder. She passed the hallway, paused, and said, "Girl, this thing looks like it's judging me." In Feng Shui, snake plants are controversial. Some love them for air purification. Others avoid them because of their harsh, upright lines and cutting energy. When placed in tight, spaced, especially hallways or near family photos, they become symbols of stuck communication, held grudges, and cut-off flow. This one sat like a green sword, dividing space, silencing softness, and blocking emotional energy from moving naturally through her home. It wasn't just taking up physical space. It was interrupting the flow of memory, connection, and conversation. And it had been doing that for years. That plant mirrored what Susan never talked about. The part of her that never really let go of the pain from her marriage. The part that said, "I'll survive, but don't ask me to open up again." Every time she passed it, there was a subtle shift, like her shoulders pulled in, like her breath shortened just a little. She didn't even realize it, but her body did. That plant held energy like a frozen voicemail. It didn't ask questions. It didn't offer light. It just stood there, reminding her what never bloomed. That hallway was supposed to be a passage, a connector. Instead, it felt like an alley with no exit. The plant didn't scream, but it refused to grow. And in Feng Shui, anything that refuses to grow is energy in emotional lock. You can't build wealth in a hallway full of silent walls. And you can't call in lucky flow if your house holds on to old tension, no matter how small or green it is. Janelle later told her, Snake plants are like exes, they survive too much and forget to die. They both laughed, but it stuck. Susan found out that snake plants are hardy because they store toxins and release oxygen at night. That's good in bedrooms, sometimes. But in Feng Shui, sharp, unyielding plants in tight, emotional spaces hold emotional residue, especially near photos of loved ones. The energy doesn't move. It ricochets. Susan didn't throw it away. She placed it outside, in the far corner of her porch, next to a small stone that read, "Let it be." She replaced the hallway plant with a soft fern. Something gentle, layered, humble. She placed a small bowl of water next to it, to invite flow, to invite emotional circulation back into the house. Later that week, she had a dream where she was walking down the same hallway, but it ended in a garden. She woke up smiling. Now when someone gifts her a plant, she just asks, "Is it a hugger or a poker?" A plant that never bends will never bloom, and neither will your energy. If your home holds too much from the past, your future won't know where to land. Susan had almost finished her sweep. The air in her home felt lighter. Her front door breathed. Her hallway flowed. She even started noticing birds around her yard again. But there was one corner she hadn't touched. The guest bedroom. More like a storage space these days. Old quilts, unpacked boxes, unused frames. And a single plant sitting by the window. A peace lily. It had been there since her mother passed. She never watered it much. It just kept staying alive. The leaves were dull. The flowers small, but it held on quietly, like her grief. She didn't go in that room often, but every time she did, there was a drop in energy. Like her chest sank a little deeper. Like time bent backward. Peace lilies in Feng Shui are often misunderstood. They're used in funerals, memorials, hospitals, anywhere sadness needs softening. But too much peace in the wrong place turns into permanent stillness. They absorb low energy. They hold it. They don't release. Placed in a room you avoid, near objects tied to loss or pause, they become memory magnets. Instead of helping energy move, they seal it in a loop. Grief feeding silence, silence feeding more grief. And if that room connects to the wealth sector of your home, you're not just pausing memory, you're pausing money flow too. That plant matched Susan's heart. Quiet. Half asleep. Still holding breath from 3 years ago. She kept telling herself, "I'm fine, it's just a plant." But the truth was it had become a permission slip to stay in pause. To not clear. To not invite. Grief had its place. But now, it had claimed square footage in her home. And her luck. That guest room was like an old email folder. Archived, untouched, but still pulling bandwidth. The peace lily sat like a gentle librarian guarding a room of stories never spoken. But Feng Shui isn't about memory. It's about movement. And wealth doesn't grow in rooms that never open. Her neighbor, Vivian, brought her banana bread one morning. Susan mentioned the plant. Vivian said, "Sweetheart, lilies are good for grief, but not for goals. That one's been doing emotional overtime." They both laughed. But that line stayed with her. She looked it up. Peace lilies filter air, but only if they're healthy. When neglected, they trap mold, hold moisture, and quietly dull the qi around them. In Feng Shui terms, they seal sadness instead of helping it pass through. Susan opened the guest room windows for the first time in months. She aired out the space. She moved the peace lily to her backyard under soft sunlight and whispered, "Thank you. I'm ready to grow now." She placed a small aloe vera plant near the window instead. Something gentle, clean, and quietly renewing. She stacked the boxes, dusted the shelves, and added a white candle to the table. A week later, she repurposed the room into a quiet reading nook. The first book she finished there had one line underlined: "When you're ready to welcome the future, the past will understand." Now, when someone asks her about lilies, she says, "They're beautiful, but don't let them raise your electric bill and your sorrow at the same time." Grief honors what was past, but energy only flows where life's still welcome. Energy doesn't just flow around what you grow. It listens to what you won't let go. Susan had done the hard work. She'd faced the hallway, the bedroom, the backyard shadows. Her home had gone from stale to spacious, and she finally started feeling like she could breathe again. That weekend, her sister dropped off her 10-year-old niece, Emily, for the afternoon. They painted rocks, made sandwiches, and wandered through the garden. When they reached the side of the house, Emily tilted her head. "Why does this part feel weird?" Susan followed her around the corner. A long trail of climbing ivy had wrapped itself around the side wall. Thick, green, old. Some of it reached the roofline. Some started pushing into the cracks of the bricks. And at the bottom, a single ceramic gnome half buried in dry leaves. Susan didn't even remember placing it there. Maybe her ex had. Or maybe it had been there since she moved in. Suddenly, the side of the house didn't feel like a garden anymore. It felt like something she'd been avoiding, and it had been growing without her. In Feng Shui, ivy is tricky business. It symbolizes growth, but without direction, especially when left unchecked or planted against the house. It climbs. It clings. It attaches to structure in a way that weakens foundation and makes energy curl inward instead of expanding out. The problem isn't the green. It's the message. Overgrown ivy near walls creates cling energy, the kind that holds on too long, blocks natural chi flow, and pulls money and luck into delay patterns. Your home becomes a maze of stuck intentions. Every curve of the vine equals a postponed decision. Every cluster of leaves equals another energy knot in your wealth map. Susan realized that wall told a story she hadn't wanted to read. It was the part of her house she never saw, and it matched the part of her life she hadn't touched. The forgotten hobbies, the half-written goals, the some days that never made it past the wall. That ivy was survival on autopilot. The "I'll deal with it later" part of her. And Feng Shui doesn't skip those corners. It amplifies them. Because when something grows without attention, it becomes resistance. And resistance always shows up in your cash flow. Slow payments, missed steps, weird blocks. That sidewall felt like an inbox full of unread emails. Not loud, not dangerous, just quietly uninviting. And that's all it takes to stall the energy of a home. Your house isn't just rooms. It's roots. And ivy like that? It reroutes energy away from opportunity and into loops of almost. Susan finally understood. If your house has places you avoid, your abundance avoids them too. Later that night, Susan Googled climbing ivy Feng Shui. She read post after post saying the same thing. Great for gardens, bad for structures. Roots invade cracks. Moisture builds under leaves. Spiders love it. Mold loves it. Energy avoids it. In Feng Shui, any growth that wraps too tight blocks free flow, especially if it touches home walls. Susan grabbed gloves and clippers the next morning. She didn't just trim. She cleared. Every vine, every dead leaf. Even the forgotten gnome. Then she pressure washed the side wall, placed 2 reflective wind bells, and lined a row of smooth river stones. Emily came back the next week and skipped down the side path like it was a secret fairy trail. Susan smiled. And for the first time in years, that part of the house didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a hallway of returning flow. Now, when someone compliments her clean garden edges, she winks. Thanks. I feng shuied the guilt off my wall. What you leave crawling up the side of your life will eventually climb over your wealth. A plant can sit still for years, but your energy keeps the score. Susan thought she was done. The front, the back, the hallway, the guest room. All cleared, all refreshed. But one quiet morning, she stepped out to get the mail and caught herself staring at the hedge along her front yard. Big, boxy, uneven, dull green. The kind of hedge that just exists. She hadn't touched it in 5 years. It was there when she moved in. A row of boxwood shrubs that ran the whole front fence. About hip height, with dry patches and cobwebs here and there. Harold, the older neighbor across the street, waved, then pointed to the shrubs. Didn't peg you for the fortress type? She smiled out of politeness, but the line stuck. In Feng Shui, shrubs aren't neutral, especially not when they form a wall. Boxwoods are slow growers. They're dense. They block vision. And in front yards, when left wild or uneven, they trap chi before it reaches the home. They act like energetic traffic cones redirecting flow instead of inviting it. Instead of open energy, you get bounce back. Instead of lucky flow, you get pressure buildup. The money's trying to reach you, but it circles. And energy that circles without entering turns stale. Susan realized something deeper. Those shrubs weren't just plants. They were a decision she never made. To engage. To open. To be seen. The front of her house had become a protective shell. And she hadn't even noticed. She wanted peace. But what she created was distance. And energy doesn't knock twice when the path is closed. Wealth doesn't land in homes that look unavailable. Even if they're clean. Even if they're nice. That hedge was a fence made of leaves. Not a wall of protection. A wall of delay. It reminded her of how people sometimes keep everything in order but never feel open for business. That was her house. Tidy, quiet, closed. Feng Shui isn't about furniture or color. It's about permission. And those boxwoods? They were holding hers hostage. Susan did some reading. Turns out, boxwoods absorb water aggressively. They need regular trimming or they dry the soil around them. In Feng Shui terms, they pull more than they give. They're great for formality, terrible for flow. Especially at the front of a home, where energy, wealth, and help are meant to arrive easily. Harold said later, "Those things are polite, but they don't know how to say hi." That weekend, Susan hired a gardener. Not to kill the hedge, but to reshape it. She had it trimmed lower rounded instead of boxed. Then she planted 3 lemon balm bushes in the open spaces. Fragrant, soft, inviting. She placed a bamboo fountain near the walkway and a small mirror near the mailbox reflecting energy inward. Finally, she added a brass bell to the porch. On Monday, she got her first handwritten note from a neighbor in 2 years. A simple "thanks for brightening the street." And in her heart, something exhaled that she didn't know had been holding tight. Now when Harold walks by, he grins and says, "Your house finally waved back. If your space feels like it's hiding from wealth, maybe it's time to let the hedge breathe." If you've been living with strange tension in your space, a kind of tight air, or money that never stays long, or just a sense that something unseen is holding back your lucky flow, this might have been why. These plants don't always look cursed. They often show up as gifts, as habits, or as leftovers from who we used to be. But Feng Shui always reminds us, energy listens to what we keep. And when we let go of what quietly blocks us, our space responds. It opens. It breathes. And wealth can find its way back in. Thank you for being here, for walking this space-by-space shift with us, and for honoring your home as something more than decor, as a partner in your future wealth. If this brought clarity or made you rethink even one small corner of your yard, we'd love to know. Like, comment, or share this with someone who's been feeling a little energetically off and may not know where to begin. Because sometimes the root of the problem is literally the root. Your space speaks. Wisdom listens.